Alex Laferriere shines versus the Ducks as the Kings roster continues to take shape. That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. The countdown to the NHL season continues. The LA Kings season opener is October 10th in Buffalo against the Sabres, 10 days away. And the Kings home opener is October 24th against the San Jose Sharks, 24 days away. The Kings have now played 3 of their 6 preseason games so far, with another coming up tonight. We have had a ton of roster moves to update you on from over the weekend. And we're going to start, though, with the Kings taking on the Anaheim Ducks in the Empire Classic in Ontario this past Saturday. Just want to get in on that game a little bit. We'll tell you David Rittich was the goalie for the LA Kings, and the Ducks went with their number one goalie going into this year, young goaltender Lucas Dostal. The Kings did not have much of an NHL roster in this one as compared to their previous preseason game in Las Vegas. That said, we did see the preseason debuts of Captain Anze Kopitar and last year's leading scorer, Adrian Kempe, for the first time. Kings were going up against a relatively young Ducks lineup, although it did include their leading scorer from last season, Frank Vetrano. But then again, the Ducks are a pretty young roster, regardless, as far as NHL experience. As for the lineup for the LA Kings, we told you the top line in place for this one, with Anze Kopitar centering Adrian Kempe and Alex Laferriere. Much more on him coming up. The second line had Samuel Hellenius with Akil Thomas and Trevor Lewis. The third line, Jack Studnicka centered Samuel Fogimo and Jeff Malott. And then the fourth line was Francesco Pinelli with Jacob Doughty and Martin Chromiak. As for the defensive pairings, we had Brant Clark and Joel Edmondson. Jordan Spence was paired up with Andreas Englund, and Caleb Jones with Jakub Dvorak. The goaltender again was David Rittich, with Eric Portillo serving as the backup. As for the game, it went very well for the LA Kings, especially starting this game. First 2 periods were pretty much dominated by LA. Alex Laferriere would open up the scoring with the Kings on a 4-on-3 power play. Adrian Kempe with a nice one-timer to Anze Kopitar. The save was made, but Alex Laferriere was right there for the tap-in goal, and the Kings took a 1-0 lead. With the game tied at 1 in the second period, Kings special teams would strike again. This time, Kempe feeding Kopitar on a shorthanded 2-on-1, with the captain scoring his first of the preseason to make it 2-1 LA. In the third, a good forecheck effort from Adrian Kempe created a turnover. Kopitar got the loose puck, fed it out in front to Laferriere for a one-timer for his second goal of the game. That made it 3-1 Kings. Now, LA would go on for a 3-2 victory. For whatever reason, we didn't have a complete list of stats to share with you on this one. Shots on goal, though, did heavily favor LA, especially in the first 2 periods. The Kings outshot the Ducks in that opening period 12-5, then outshot them in the second period 13-3. Anaheim did have a bit of a push in the third period, but overall, the Kings outshoot the Ducks in the game 33-19. As I said, the Kings were the better team throughout most of this game, and clearly the top line of Kopi, Juice, and Laffy really stood out in this game. And that line is clearly our 3 stars of the game for the win over the Ducks. Kopitar with a goal and 2 assists. He's the number 1 star. Alex Laferriere, a pair of goals. He is the number 2 star. And Adrian Kempe with a pair of assists. He is the number 3 star. And again, those 3 guys really, really stood out on the ice all night long in all situations, 5-on-5. killing penalties, and on the power play as well. And I know it's not very creative, but we do believe, right, that this is going to be the Kings' top line for this season. And, you like to look for nicknames for a line. Maybe it's not very creative. Maybe it's too easy. But how about the A-team? Anze, Adrian, and Alex. The A-team? Anybody? If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A-team. Anyone? No? Certain age? All right. I'm throwing it out there. It's not the most creative. The A-line, the A-team. Anyway, let's move on. The Kings are now 2-1 this preseason, and thankfully, no injuries to report from this game. Now, what did we like about the win over the Ducks? Well, clearly the top line looked great with Alex Laferriere taking over for Quentin Byfield on the wing, with Byfield moving to center. And it's very early, but Laferriere has had a nice preseason so far. He's got 3 goals in 2 games. Now, he did have that very bad turnover that led directly to a goal in the preseason game against Vegas, but he clearly put that behind him, moved on, turned the page, and had a very solid next game with those 2 goals. Now, he was set up very nicely for both goals by his 2 veteran line mates, but still, I've talked about this with Alex Laferriere. I like a lot of things about him. He's still very young. He's still learning the NHL game. But one thing he needs to do is to be more of a net front presence, and that's exactly where he scored both of his goals in this game, and where I believe his 3rd goal was also around the front of the net. Clearly, the coaching staff agrees, and clearly he's listened to them, and he's taken this to heart. And after the game, Alex Laferriere was asked about it, and he said the following quote, "I think my job is to just kind of retrieve pucks, get rebounds when they're there, and let the shooters shoot. Obviously, Juice loves to shoot the puck, and Kev is out there. He loves to shoot the puck too. So as long as I can be in the goalie's eyes and find those rebounds, that's my job." End quote from Kings forward Alex Laferriere. So yeah, exactly. And it's not like he doesn't have good skating ability. It's not like he doesn't have a pretty good shot. It is something he said he worked on in the offseason was his shot. But again, we saw last season, he was a bit of a floater, right? Kind of looking for a shot around the perimeter now and then. He didn't really go to the net a lot. And Jim Hiller, Kings' new head coach, has talked about he wants his team to be grittier, more blue collar. And when you're a young player like Alex Laferriere and you're put on the top line, and look, a lot of people aren't going to look at what Alex Laferriere has accomplished in his young career and say that's a top line player. So he's getting a huge opportunity to be on the top line and play with 2 exceptional players in Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe, and he's going to do whatever the coaching staff asks him because he knows, hey, I'm just getting started with this NHL thing. I want to be here for a long time. I can't believe I'm playing on this top line, and I'm going to do whatever they say. And so far, like I said, he's taken it to heart, and he's doing exactly what they've asked him to do, and he's been rewarded for it. So great to see that Alex Laferriere, so far, very small sample size. I know it's preseason, but he's looked great so far in the preseason, other than that one mistake, which he moved on from and didn't let it affect the next game. And that's what you got to do as a professional athlete. There are going to be mistakes made, but you can't let what has happened in the past affect what you're going to do in the future. You got to move on to learn from it and take those lessons and go forward. And he certainly has done that. So really encourage what we've seen from Alex Laferriere so far on the season. I did want to mention David Riddick played the entire game. I thought he was solid in net. Nothing spectacular, but got the job done. The 2 goals he allowed, I wouldn't call them necessarily fluke goals, but it wasn't like he was beat, with a good shot. One of them went off a deflection and off his helmet and in. And then the other one was redirected in with a skate, which I have no idea why the NHL allows that. I mean, when a player intentionally moves his skate to deflect the puck in, I don't think that should be a goal. Now they don't allow you to kick the goal in. They say that's more of a safety issue. And if it goes off your equipment by accident, then that's just either bad luck or good luck, depending on how you look at it. But when a player intentionally moves his skate to angle the puck into the net, I've never thought that should be a goal, but it is. And that was the goal that was allowed. So David Riddick, again, didn't allow any soft goals, a couple of kind of fluky goals. So I thought he was solid. And as he gets ready to be the solid number 2 goalie for the LA Kings this year. Special teams I thought looked good for the Kings, both power play and shorthanded. I did like Jim Hiller doing something a little bit different when the Kings had that 4-on-3 power play that they scored on. He put 4 forwards out on the ice, and I thought that was pretty cool. You don't see that a lot. Some other quick observations. I thought Samuel Fagimo continues to shoot a lot. I love the shot first mentality, but none of those shots are close to going in. They've all been very routine saves, a lot of one-timers from the face-off dots. So I like the fact that he's shooting. He's being aggressive, but he really hasn't come close to scoring. Brent Clark continues to develop. Thought he looked very creative in this game, which, we were hoping to see this season. He did have one bad turnover, and then he compounded it by immediately taking a penalty, so that wasn't great. Obviously, he still has things to learn, but the creativity, the skating, his composure with the puck is very exciting and fun to watch, and he gives a different element that no other Kings defenseman really has. Even Drew Doughty doesn't kind of dangle and have the patience and kind of hold defensemen the way Brent Clark can, even in his very limited professional experience. I thought Jordan Spence was very solid, his usual solid self in this game. And obviously with the Drew Doughty injury, Clark and Spence are going to get more minutes and expanded roles, so especially on the power play. So I thought they both overall looked pretty good in this game. Real quick, Samuel Hellenius continues to improve, a big guy that's kind of still growing into his body. I look forward to seeing his development with the Ontario Reign this year. Jack Studnicka is a guy who has been noticeable this preseason. I don't think he's certainly been spectacular, and I don't think he's an NHL regular, but a guy who, again, has been noticeable. And if there is an injury, maybe a bottom six type of player that the Kings feel like they could call him up and fill a role for a little bit, I think he could probably do that. I think he's kind of maybe earned at least that consideration going into the season. Akil Thomas continues to be a bit quiet this preseason, probably reminding us that splash he made last season in the NHL, 3 goals in 7 games, is probably not something we should really expect going into this season. But yeah, some observations from a solid effort from the Kings. LA back in action tonight against the Ducks again in Anaheim. And, the Kings and the Reign's rosters are starting to take shape. We'll talk about that more here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Those of us that live in the LA area, very lucky. We have so many options to see live events, sports for sure. I was at the Chargers-Chiefs game this past Sunday, but it's not just about sports. You've got theater events, you've got concerts. No matter, though, what you're into, do what I do and use Gametime for all your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluffs to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get Dodger playoff tickets for just over $100. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So the Kings are back in action tonight, as I mentioned, taking on the Ducks in Anaheim. This is the Kings' final preseason game in Southern California as they get ready to head off to Quebec for their final 2 preseason games and the conclusion of training camp. And then, of course, they start the regular season on an extended road trip. So this will be the last time we see the Kings in Southern California until mid-October. So guys are going to have to get packed up and get ready to go on the road. But as far as the Kings roster, obviously taking shape for the regular season, also the Ontario Reign, their roster taking shape as well. The Kings did send 8 players to Ontario since our last show. Forwards Martin Kromiak, Atu Yemsen, Caleb Lawrence, Francesco Pinelli, and Cohen Ziemer, along with defenseman Angus Booth and Jakub Dvorak, and goalie Eric Portillo, all assigned to the AHL. I liked the first looks I saw from Atu Yemsen, both in the rookie faceoff and in the preseason. Caleb Lawrence is a young guy with a lot of size that really looks like an NHL player. He now has to just develop his game, but he definitely has the size and the skill, I think. Just needs some experience. Francesco Pinelli is a guy I've been excited about, but really didn't have a great year last year. I think we need to see a step forward from him coming up this season. And Eric Portillo going to get that number 1 goaltender job now with the Ontario Reign. Hopefully he has a solid full season, and maybe he's in play to be the Kings' number 1 goalie next season. The Kings also placed forwards Tyler Madden and Glenn Godden, along with defensemen Riley Walsh and Joe Hicketts, on waivers all of those 4 players cleared waivers. They were not picked up by another team, and they've all been assigned to Ontario in the AHL. Again, the Kings did also place forward Jeff Malott on waivers today, so he needs to clear, which would be tomorrow if nobody picks him up. And if that's the case, which is expected, then he would be sent down to Ontario as well. 11 players were released from their training camp tryouts. They will report to Ontario for their training camp. They would be forwards Bryce Brodzinski, Jacob Doughty, Sean Element, Charles Udon, Patrick Monahan, Quinn Olson, and Jake Wise, as well as defensemen Parker Berge, Drew Krebs, Jack Miller, and Luke Rowe. The Ontario Reign did officially open up their training camp today on Monday. So the LA Kings currently have 34 players on their training camp roster, 19 forwards, Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, Philip Deneau, Quentin Byfield, Trevor Moore, Alex Laferriere, Tanner Jeannot, Trevor Lewis, Warren Fogle, Alex Turcotte, Samuel Fagemo, Akil Thomas, Andre Lee, Taylor Ward, Jack Studnicka, Samuel Helenius, and John Parker Jones. Arthur Kaliev's on the list as well, but obviously not going to be a part of the opening training camp or opening roster for the Kings with the injury. There's 11 defensemen: Mikey Anderson, Brant Clark, Vladislav Gavrikov, Jordan Spence, Andreas Englund, Joel Edmondson, Kyle Burrows, Jacob Movarar, Cole Krieger, and Caleb Jones. Drew Doughty's on the list as well, but again, he's injured, so he won't be a part of the season to start for the Kings. You've got 4 goaltenders still on the training camp roster: Darcy Kemper, David Riddick, Phoenix Copley, and Drayden McKay. As for the opening night roster for the Kings, they can have a maximum of 23 players, a minimum of 20 players. Obviously, you would subtract Kaliev and Doughty due to injury. We're fairly confident that Kopitar, Kempe, Fiala, Deneau, Byfield, Moore, Laferriere, Jeannot, Fogle, and Turcotte are going to be on the opening night roster, as well as defensemen Anderson, Clark, Gavrikov, Spence, and Edmondson. The 2 goalies are going to be Darcy Kemper and David Riddick. So I would say of the forwards left, Helenius, Ward, Studnicka, and Parker Jones, they're going to be sent down to the AHL. Of the defensemen remaining, Krieger and Jones are going to be sent down, along with goalies Phoenix Copley and Drayden McKay. So I think that gives us 6 players for the final 3 roster spots on the LA Kings to be decided. Forwards, Akil Thomas, Samuel Fagemo, and Andre Lee, and defensemen Kyle Burrows, Andreas Englund, and Jacob Movarar. Of that group of forwards, I have honestly felt like Andre Lee has looked the best in training camp. Akil Thomas and Samuel Fagemo both have been okay, but Lee has been active. He's been physical. He does a lot more. He's got a lot more size than those 2 other guys at 6'5", 200 pounds. If I was basing it solely on what I've seen in training camp, and obviously I have not been there for the practices, I'm just talking about the preseason games, I would look for Andre Lee to be on the roster, and then you decide between, if you're going to keep 2 extra forwards, is it going to be Thomas? Is it going to be Fagemo? I would think it would be Akil Thomas. That would mean that Fagemo, I believe, would be exposed to waivers again, and he could be picked up, but we'll see. Of the 3 defensemen remaining that I mentioned, I think Kyle Burrows appears to be in the spot that's been vacated by Drew Doughty. So I think he's on the list. And then you've got, if you want to add another defenseman, is it Andreas Englund? Is it Jacob Movarar? I would think Englund would get the advantage over Movarar because he has obviously NHL experience, having played pretty much all of last season. So still some decisions to be made, maybe some difficult decisions for the LA Kings as that final group takes shape. So we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on what happens in the remaining preseason games. If those guys are involved and what they do, we'll definitely have a spotlight on them, including tonight against the Ducks. So the Kings also, I think, looking to pare down the group they're going to take with them to Quebec to continue training camp and play those final 2 preseason games as well. So maybe a message will be sent there or not. We shall see. So with Drew Doughty and others around the NHL getting hurt this preseason, should the NHL change their rules regarding veteran participation? We'll discuss that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And of course, FanDuel is there for you to bet on Major League Baseball as the postseason is about to get underway. The Dodgers are a plus 350 to win it all. You got college football and, of course, hockey coming up as well. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. So we don't really have a Drew Doughty update, but I did want to kind of reestablish where the Kings were with Drew Doughty. We told you on Friday's show that the Kings released a statement saying that Doughty was going to undergo surgery to repair a fractured ankle and was listed as month to month. Dennis Bernstein of the fourth period reported that there were no further damage to Doughty's Achilles tendon, which apparently was a concern. But then we had Frank Saravelli of the Daily Faceoff saying that there was disappointing news upon further examination that, of course, Doughty is going to have the surgery, but there was tendon damage as well in the ankle, and he had a timeline of 10 to 14 weeks for Drew Doughty. Nick Nixon did say on the broadcast on Saturday that Doughty was going to have surgery sometime early this week. Once that happens, I don't know if we're going to get an update on that as far as if the surgery went well or if the doctors saw anything upon further examination when they obviously got in there, so to speak, maybe positively or negatively. But if obviously we get an update on that, we will certainly pass that along, but nothing new to report from this past Friday. Now, the NHL has rules about the minimum number of players that play in preseason games. If you follow the NFL like I do, you know that the preseason games very rarely these days will feature an NFL starting quarterback. And a lot of the big name starters will not play in those NFL preseason games. Now, there is certainly a risk of injury for football and hockey in particular, those collision sports. But should the NHL change their rules? Now, like I said, they have a minimum number they require NHL teams to put on the ice for preseason games. And the reason for this is people are paying their hard-earned money to see these games, and the NHL doesn't want the teams to just throw out a bunch of AHL players and have the fans be disappointed. If you go out to the Empire Classic, you're probably thrilled to get to see Anze, Kopitar, and Adrian Kempe in action, and they didn't disappoint. They put on a show. And again, you're asking season ticket holders. I'm a season ticket holder for the LA Chargers along with my wife. I married into it. And we are charged for these preseason games the same price as regular season games. You don't get a discount. So that's the reason behind it. And I understand it from a fan perspective, from a league perspective. And frankly, again, as someone who is a season ticket holder, you don't want to go. I don't go to the NFL preseason games because there's nobody there playing that I care about for the most part. Sure, you've got some young guys getting some experience. Sure, maybe the bottom part of the roster, these guys are battling it out, but most of that is really done in training camp anyway. So should the NHL change the rule? Patrick Laine, if you didn't see this, for the Montreal Canadiens, took a knee-on-knee hit. He's going to be out an extended period of time. We obviously have seen Drew Doughty. There's been others. And yes, it sucks when a player you're counting on gets hurt in what is essentially a meaningless game. But from my perspective, I don't think the NHL needs to change this rule. I understand why they do it. The Drew Doughty thing was a fluke that could have happened in practice as he's skating hard, battling along the boards, and he goes in awkwardly. Now, the Patrick Laine thing was different. That was a bit of a dirty play where a player stuck out his knee and went knee on knee with him. But I just don't think when you play in a sport like hockey and football, there's no way to completely prevent injuries. They're trying their best to do this, particularly in football. But it's just, if you're out there and you're competing, stuff's going to happen. And I don't think the NHL needs to get rid of this rule and make it to where none of the veterans have to play in the preseason games. Now, the NFL is kind of continuing to pare down preseason games more and more, where they may eventually do away with the preseason altogether. But of course, that's all goes along with collective bargaining. They're going to want something in return from the players as well. So it's more than just the actual experience or being afraid of putting players out there because of injury. Whether the NHL does that or not, I don't know. I don't know that there's been a big outcry, frankly, because of that. If there is, I haven't heard it. But I guess if, look, Drew Doughty's a big player. Patrick Laine is a name player. It would probably take, frankly, Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon or some superstar, Sidney Crosby, to get seriously injured before people start really bringing it up. I'm not suggesting Drew Doughty and Patrick Laine aren't very good players and important players, but that's the only thing I can think of to where there could be a huge outcry. And owners will say, I'm paying, Connor McDavid $11 million a year or whatever to play. In the regular season, I don't need him playing in these preseason games. And again, they could hold Connor McDavid out for the entire preseason if they wanted to, but there are a certain number of veteran players who do have to play. It's not specific to this player has to play. So, if you really wanted to protect a player, you could do that, but I really don't think it's necessary. And frankly, if you watch the NFL, I think the first couple of games of the season, I think the quality of play is pretty bad because of the lack of players participating in the preseason. There's nothing that really takes the place of those live bullets, so to speak. Even in training camp, it's not the same. I think the quality of play at the beginning of the NHL season would probably suffer as well if the NHL said you don't have to play any veterans, just let them sit and get ready for the regular season. So, like I said, there's no way to completely protect players. It's a contact sport. It's a sport that moves at high speeds, and stuff's going to happen. It's unfortunate, but I don't think the NHL needs to change the rules for the veteran players, some of them being required to play in the preseason games. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we will recap what happens in the Kings-Ducks preseason game at Anaheim. We'll look at some of the rosters for that game and the players that participated and see if maybe any of them stood out and strengthened their chances of being on the opening night roster or not. Also, coming up later this week, we're going to have a Kings roundtable where several special guests are going to join me for one show. Guys that that have been on the show before and give us their thoughts on the upcoming season. Really looking forward to that. And of course, on Friday, it's our typical fan feedback show. You can talk about anything we talked about on today's show. If you want to send an email for that, it's lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always post your thoughts if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section. We appreciate that. If you want to stay connected with the show on social media, we're on X or on Twitter, Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. And as always, go Kings, go.